You might have heard that if you drop a frog in a pot of boiling water, it'll jump out right away. But if you put it in lukewarm water and then slowly heat it up, the frog won't survive. The frog's big problem is that it lacks the ability to rethink the situation. It doesn't realize that the warm bath is slowly becoming a death trap until it's too late. Humans may be smarter than frogs, but our world is full of slow boiling pots. Think about how slow people were to react to warnings about a pandemic, climate change, or democracies in peril. We fail to recognize the danger because we're reluctant to rethink the situation. Often, we find ourselves caught in the same situation, repeating the same actions over and over again until we finally fail. We cease to develop because we're stuck in the same trap of refusing to rethink, adapt, or change our old habits. Coming from a family of immigrants, I can relate to this. My parents constantly tell me to rethink my decisions, whether it's about what I want to be in life or checking my math homework. From his home in the pandemic, Adam Grant dives deep into this topic with his April 2021 TED Talk, What Frogs in Hot Water Can Teach Us About Thinking Again. We struggle with rethinking in all kinds of situations. We expect our squeaky brakes to keep working until they finally fail on the freeway. And we keep watching Game of Thrones even after the show has completely jumped the shark. Yet, rethinking isn't a hurdle in every part of our lives. We're happy to refresh our wardrobes or renovate our kitchens. But when it comes to our goals, identities, or habits, we tend to stick to our guns. And in a rapidly changing world, that's a huge problem. On a trip to Panama, I was excited for my first time climbing a mountain. Actually, an active volcano, literally a slow boiling pot. So we get off to a late start, but it's only supposed to take about 2 hours to reach the summit. After 4 hours, we still haven't gotten to the top. It's a little strange that it's taking so long. But we don't stop to rethink about whether we want to turn around. We've already come so far, we have to get to the top. It turns out we read the wrong map. We're on Panama's highest mountain. It takes 6 to 8 hours to reach the summit. We're stranded with no food, no water, no cell phone, and no energy to make the hike back down. This kind of mistake is called escalation of commitment to a losing course of action. It happens when you make initial investment of either time or money, and then you find out that it may have been a bad decision. But instead of rethinking it, you double down and invest more. You want to prove to yourself and to everyone else that you made a good decision. Escalation of commitment explains so many familiar businesses plummeting. Blockbuster, BlackBerry, Kodak. Leaders just kept simmering in their slow boiling pots, failing to rethink their strategies. And it's hard to admit that we are wrong or that we may have even wasted years of our lives. So instead, we just tell ourselves, if I try harder, I can turn this around. In Panama, my friends and I got lucky. About an hour into our descent, a lone pickup truck came down from the volcano and rescued us from our slow boiling pot. But there's a fine line between heroic persistence and stubborn stupidity. Never give up doesn't mean keep doing the thing that's failing. It means don't get locked into a narrow path and stay open to broadening your goals. The ultimate goal is to make it down the mountain, not just to make it to the top. Your goals can give you tunnel vision, blinding you from rethinking the situation. A few years ago, I was teaching a class on the importance of rethinking, and afterwards, a student came up to me and said, "You know, you're not following your own principles." Well, they say feedback is a gift, but in that moment, I wondered, how do I return this? I had been teaching the same material the same way, year after year. I had my act down. But even good habits can stand in the way of rethinking. There's a name for this too. It's called cognitive entrenchment, where you get stuck in the way you've always done things. Just thinking about rethinking made me defensive. And then, instead of defensiveness, I tried curiosity. I threw out my lesson plans for one day of class and invited my students to design their own session. The first year, they wrote letters to their freshman selves about what they wished they'd rethought or known sooner. The next year, they gave passion talks. They each had 1 minute to share something that they loved or cared about deeply. And now, all my students give passion talks to introduce themselves to the class. I believe that good teachers introduce new thoughts, but great teachers introduce new ways of thinking. Rethinking does not have to change your mind, however. It just means staying open to reconsidering. A hallmark of wisdom is knowing when to grit and when to quit. When to throw in the towel on an old identity and dive into a new one. When to walk away from old habits and start scaling a new mountain. Rethinking isn't just a skill you have to master personally. It's a value we all, as a whole, need to embrace culturally. We live in a world that mistakes confidence for competence. That favors the comfort of conviction over the discomfort of doubt. That accuses people who change their minds of flip-floppery, when in fact, they might be learning. A few years ago, I was working on a project for the Gates Foundation, and I suggested that leaders could record their own version of mean tweets. Melinda Gates volunteered to go first, and one of the points of feedback that she read said, "Melinda is like Mary effin' Poppins, practically perfect in every way." And then she began listing all her imperfections. People at the Gates Foundation who saw that video ended up becoming more willing to recognize and overcome their own limitations. What Melinda was modeling was confident humility. Confident humility is being secure enough in your own strengths to acknowledge your weaknesses. It gives you the courage to say, "I don't know," instead of pretending you have all the answers. It encourages you to listen to ideas that make you think hard, not just ones that make you feel good. To surround yourself with people who challenge your thought process, not just ones who accept your conclusions. And sometimes it even leads you to challenge your own conclusions. Like with that story of the frog that can't survive the slow boiling pot. I found out recently that that's a myth. If you heat up the water, the frog will jump out as soon as it gets uncomfortably warm. Of course it jumps out. It's not an idiot. The problem isn't the frog, it's us. Once we accept the story as true, we don't bother to think again. What if we were more like the frog, ready to jump out as soon as the water gets too warm? We need to be ready to think again.